everyone. My name is Jason Park, and tonight I am thrilled to launch the first ever episode of Storytellers in Politics with Jason Park. As you can probably tell from the live stream, this is Facebook and not YouTube, and so we're going to be a little flexible here today because we are experiencing some technical difficulties. But that being said, we are really excited about the program that we have tonight. And without further ado, I'm going to dive right into first sharing with you all what this podcast is about. I'm thrilled to be moderating conversations once every week on Tuesday evenings, and each episode will be focused on the intersection of technology and politics. Each episode is going to aim to make you all, as viewers, as information consumers, feel that you all are agents of change, that you all have agency and influence over the future direction of our country. And I also want to, at times, challenge you all in terms of how technology has been used and could be better used in terms of swaying voters' decisions. And so with that, we're going to introduce our guest this evening, Troy Blackwell Jr. We are so excited to have you on the show tonight. Thank you so much for being here. For you all, if you haven't met Troy before, Troy is a proud Afro-Latino from the Bronx in New York. He's a trusted spokesperson, a government executive who has worked for 2 presidential administrations and 3 national campaigns. More recently, Troy served as President Biden's Deputy Chief Communications Officer at the United States Department of Commerce and as a council member on the White House Working Group for Science and Technology. Previously, Troy was the global spokesperson for the Peace Corps and the first openly LGBTQ person to serve in that role. As an advocate for public service, Troy has worked with labor unions, including the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, Communication Workers of America, and SEIU's Fight for $15. During the COVID pandemic, Troy also founded Ready for Change, a PAC focused on getting out the 18 to 40-year-old vote. And through targeted outreach, text banking, and organizing, Troy's PAC contacted over 26,000 voters on behalf of Democrats. Please join me tonight in warmly welcoming Troy Blackwell Jr. Thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Jason, and congratulations on your new podcast.
Thank you. Thank you, my friend. Let's get right into the questions. I know we have so much to learn from you being on the show this evening. Let's first start off by diving into your time working for the federal government as a Biden-Harris appointee. What did you do in the previous administration, and how did your experience inform your understanding of effective and efficient use of technology in government and politics?
Yes. Well, I'm super excited to be with you. And in regards to the Biden-Harris administration, as Jason Conley mentioned, I was most recently the Deputy Chief Communications Officer at Commerce. So I led the communications team specifically in the Office of Patent and Trademarks and also in NTIA, which is the National Telecommunications and Information Agency. And what we did really is, in regards to technology and science and AI, is we formed a working group across the federal government. We worked on the first ever AI, artificial intelligence strategy from the federal government that outlined guidelines and just best practices for how to use AI because it is so new in the federal government. But second was also utilizing technology. We created a council to basically increase diversity amongst entrepreneurs, specifically when it comes to patent and trademarks. So many entrepreneurs have really great ideas, whether it's coming up with a new app, whether it's coming up with a new technological invention, but they don't necessarily always protect their intellectual property. So we looked at all of those approaches, how we can increase diversity amongst entrepreneurs, best practices and guidelines for artificial intelligence, and then also just figuring out how we can work with those in the private sector as it relates to technology, and in the communication space. So really, really proud of that work.
Wow, that is very impressive. And thank you for not only your service in the past administration, but also really laying out the scope of work and your broad achievements and accomplishments in the previous administration, which is very, very impressive. And so let's shift gears a little bit in terms of talking now about your campaign for DNC Vice Chair. On the campaign trail as a candidate for DNC Vice Chair, you mentioned that AI and emerging technologies must be leveraged to modernize voter files, to improve field strategy and scale volunteer programs. What exactly could that look like, and how would that be implemented?
Yeah. So I think that can be implemented a couple of ways, but I really think the approach is threefold. The first, I'm always in favor of working groups and bringing those who have really good ideas to the table. Admittedly, I am someone who's worked with tech, but I'm not, necessarily an engineer or have a science background by trade. So for one, I think it's about bringing people together at the table. But as it relates to elections, my concern about technology and voter files is really the integrity of it. So what we're seeing, and at least what we've noticed since 2021, so over the last 3 to 4 years, is the way that AI is being used in politics. We've seen that specifically there have been uses of AI to mimic people's voices, where people are getting robocalls saying that they are from a particular office or a party or a campaign that they're not a part of. We've seen just how expanded AI has gotten, where now you can scan a picture of someone and they can come up with videos and scripts basically being attributed to someone, and it looks 100% real, but it may not necessarily be that person. And I remember this happened in the 24 primary, right before, in the early stages, when President Biden, I believe, was being casted on the ballot in New Hampshire, and folks were asking to write President Biden in on that ballot. And folks in the state of New Hampshire were getting robocalls saying that they were from other campaigns. There were fake videos that were going around. That's very, very alarming. There's like no guardrails for that. And so one of the things that I would hope that, the party and others will speak about specifically as we unfold for 2026 and then definitely for 2028 is, I think the FEC, which is the Federal Election Commission, there should be some sort of integrity practice or something to basically specify to say that this is authentic. Right? Your video, your phone call, your image, we know that that's so much of how much we reach voters, but there's no way right now, at least that I'm aware of, that I've seen, that says, hey, your image, your voice, your likeness is being used in an authentic way. So it can be very misleading, and that concerns me for us as Democrats, because we're living in an era of misinformation and disinformation.
That's right.
And the second point specifically about voter files, so much of our voter files are regarded in one company. It's usually on a cloud base, right? So if anything happens with that company, if there's a buyout, if a contract expires, we necessarily don't own those voter files. Those are on loan to us that we utilize from a cloud. So again, given those circumstances from, a business and vendor perspective, and then looking at the rise of AI that we know that the other side is going to use, that to me is where the concern is around technology.
I see. Wow, you really covered, all the different topics that I just asked you about, and also very impressive is you not only weaved in the very glaring problems, but also looking at potential solutions, right? Because we often see in our political discourse, people are really good at identifying the problem, but maybe not as good as in terms of offering potential solutions. So thank you for that detailed answer as well. And so now I understand that you also started a PAC called Ready for Change, and I'm really interested to learn more about it. I think the accomplishments that you were able to make through that PAC are very impressive. And so what was the process of starting a Ready for Change PAC like for you? I know not everyone gets up one morning and knows how to, start a PAC. It's definitely, I imagine, a process. And so I want to hear more about the process of starting that. And also, how did that experience shape your views on how Democrats or what Democrats need to do to close the gap with the other side in terms of effectively and efficiently using technology to, organize and also mobilize?
Yeah. So I had no intention of creating a PAC. It was something that came out of happenstance. So after 2020, I worked on President Biden's campaign when we got him elected in 2020. And I was debating what I wanted to do next. and my local city council member had got elected to Congress, Richie Torres, and so his city council seat was open. And so I made the decision to run for city council in my hometown in New York City. And it was a wide open race. It was an open seat, so there were about 10 candidates running. And we were running for office during the middle of the pandemic. So the vaccine mandates weren't even set in stone yet. So you can imagine, as a first-time candidate running for office, campaigning in New York City, where there's thousands of people, in a district, and having to knock on doors and show up in places. It was really hard to get that human to human connection. But ultimately, I didn't advance to the general. But one of the things that I identified that was so important for me was that so many young voters were not necessarily engaged. A lot of folks voted in 2020 in the presidential election, but in the off years in 2021, where there were a lot of gubernatorial and municipal elections happening across the country, we saw that votes fell off. And so I was really concerned about, one, young voters. And when I say young, I'm talking about anyone under 40. And then more specifically, in my hometown, specifically in the Bronx, we are a Latino majority county. And so most of our young people, our voter base, are mostly people of color. And so I saw a lot of other youth organizations that existed, but they were not necessarily focused on youth of color. And so I thought this was just such a unique opportunity because, again, running for office during COVID, it was also the first time that New York City ever did ranked choice voting. And so this was a new system that we implemented very much for the first time. And so I thought it was really important to provide that voter education to young people, because once you realize, hey, if you care about the criminal justice system, you should know who your district attorney is. You care about, clean streets, or you want a new basketball court in the park, you should know who your city council member is. Those are really important issues. And so that's why I created Ready for Change. That was my motto running for office, was that I was ready for change. We did not have many people who were under the age of 40 that were running for office, specifically even in New York City, in a very progressive city. And so I wanted to just give that education awareness to other young people. So we started raising money. We, put on events. We were, technically nonpartisan. So would go to different nonprofits and talk about, one, what the process of certain elections were. There were so many young people, which I'm sure you and many of your viewers can relate to. I knew so many people in their 20s who were like, I had no idea that I can vote for a judge. I had no idea that, my local prosecutor, a district attorney was someone that I could vote for. And I thought it was so important because, again, we focus so much on the big elections. We focus on the presidential, which is very important, but also the other elections down ballot, those are equally as important, because those are the ones that you really see the direct impact and result in your life. And so Ready for Change became a labor of love, and I'm really excited that it's lasted this long and we were able to contact so many young people.
That is really impressive. I think what I'm really impressed by is not only you answering the question very well, but also you touched upon a lot of issues that Democrats are talking about right now in terms of how do we make sure we win races at all levels, and how do we also make sure that we win back the communities that we lost to Trump in this past election. And so thank you for answering that question. I think each of your responses are getting much and much better, and I'm getting more and more impressed by each and every response that I get. So thank you for answering that. Now, something that I want to explore a little bit more now that we've talked about Ready for Change, your past experience in the Biden-Harris administration, is now about this current administration, the second Trump administration. And we saw in the recent second inauguration of President Trump that we saw many heads of major tech giants not only attending, but having prime seats at the inauguration ceremony. And this, along with President Biden's warning of a tech industrial complex, have already exacerbated existing fears in our party on the Democratic side about misinformation, disinformation being weaponized to help the other side. And so I know we talked a little bit about misinformation and disinformation already, but in your opinion, what are concrete steps that Democrats should take to fight back against these?
Yes, that is a big question. Um, I first want to start off with describing what tech is, right? Because I think a lot of people, when they hear tech, if when they think about tech as an industry, a lot of people think that you have to be an engineer or you have to be someone who codes or someone who has a science background. But so much of tech is not necessarily only that. There are a lot of policy folks who work in tech. There are a lot of communications folks like myself who work in tech. There are folks who do social impact work that are in tech. And what we're seeing is that whether it's local government or state government, or whether it's foreign entities, other countries, folks are using tech across the board for multiple different things. And in this particular scenario, as someone who comes from communications, we're seeing tech in this case be social media, right? What we saw with the inauguration was that we saw the CEOs of some of the biggest social media companies in the country, if not world, that were there celebrating this inauguration. And we know that Elon Musk bought Twitter and renamed it as X, right? He's an official figure as part of the Trump administration. We know that Mark Zuckerberg, who is the owner, the founder and CEO of Meta, which includes Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, for those of us who have families overseas, he was also part of that group. We know that the CEO of TikTok was a part of that group. And the concern for me is that when it comes to these social media companies, they are not only monitoring, but controlling the algorithm of information that people get. And so, for example, when you talk about certain causes or certain things that may be labeled progressive, you use certain buzzwords or certain hashtags, there's an algorithm that blocks certain information from getting to other people, right? And that's not necessarily working in our favor as Democrats. That's where my biggest concern is. In terms of how do we combat that, I think it's going to be a little tricky with the CEOs of certain companies because those are international organizations and we know that they fluctuate depending who's in power. But I think the most important thing that any of us can do is make sure that we're owning our media, right? So much of information is based on social media. That's where people get their news, but it's not the only source. We know that folks do still get news in traditional spaces, whether it's through TV or newspapers. We know that there are a lot of local newspapers that are being bought up and now owned by conservative donors, right? I think that's a space for us. So much of our media, we've gotten labeled with the mainstream media narrative that the mainstream media is too progressive, that they are in the back pockets of the Democrats. But we see that that's not necessarily true. Mainstream media's role is to be nonpartisan, it's to tell the truth. But we're living in an era where between the social media companies and even print companies, print meaning, newspapers, local distributors, that they're being owned by those who are on the right. We're seeing how popular podcasts are, how influencers are, and how that's being utilized to provide information to people that are across the sphere, right? Meeting people where they are. So for me, the solution in that space is like, we need to get back to our own media. And I think that starts with, a conversation with some of the donors in our party. And I know that's a sensitive conversation for some people, but it's a real conversation, right? We can't own media and get the messages we want out there without the help of some of those who can provide the financial support. So it's a much bigger and larger conversation, but hopefully that provides the context.
I think that's very fascinating because if we're already seeing newspapers and podcasts being owned by the other side, by conservatives, then it's already an uphill battle for us, right? And so I think what you pointed out is so interesting. It's really interesting. I can feel the brain juices and the gears in my brain turning already. Well, thank you so much for answering questions about the past and the present. And really my final question for you is about the future. We're looking ahead to 2026 as a real opportunity to hold this administration in check and push back against their excesses. And obviously also 2028, right? We know that there are already Republican candidates who are part of the MAGA movement like J.D. Vance. making no secret about their intentions for 2028. And so, my question for you to end this evening is, how should Democrats utilize AI and tech to win these elections in 2026 and 2028?
Yeah, I think that's a big conversation. But three things in particular stand out to me. One, I think we have to get honest about the conversation about crypto. Crypto is very popular right now. Unfortunately, the party has been labeled as being not friendly to crypto, but it's a huge fundraising tool. And I'm surprised that it's kind of slipped through the cracks on our end, on the party's end. I think we need to start having the conversations with those that are in the crypto space, because that is going to be a big determining factor, specifically when we talk about tech regulation, what happens in the future with the Treasury Department, how is this currency being evaluated, how do we look at it. I do think that it's going to be something that will be made an issue in 26 and in 28. So that's the first thing. The second thing is going back to what I mentioned a little bit earlier, is that I really think there needs to be a larger conversation with the FEC about how are we making sure that whether it's ads, whether it's a TV ad, a digital ad, whether it's a robocall, how are we making sure that people's likeness is authenticated? I think that's going to be the biggest concern for me for 26 and 28 in terms of using the tech and AI space. And the third is our voter files. I think what I've heard a lot from my experience with the DNC and some of the relationships with the state parties is that not necessarily everyone owns their voter files, right? Again, these are things that exist on a cloud. These are things that are loaned. These are things that are necessarily passed around, but they're not something that is concrete and existing specifically, again, in our own ownership. So I think that's going to be really important, specifically for the state parties as we move forward, is making sure that there's ownership over those voter files. So I think those are my top three issues. I know I could probably give more, but I think in terms of being tangible, I think that's it. We have to own our voter files. We have to be more receptive to having a conversation with crypto and FEC. We need to make sure that we have some sort of authenticator to verify that candidates are who they say they are, or we're going to just enter into new territory that may be hard to come back from until there is regulation.
Thank you for laying out tangible items. I think a lot of folks these days feel that the popular discourse, the narrative, what have you, out in our country, nationally, feels like a cacophony. And so definitely having tangible things that, are top of issue for you, and I think should be top of issue for all Democrats and folks who are concerned citizens. Thank you so much for laying that out. Well, that concludes tonight's episode. Thank you again for being here, Troy. I really appreciate your time. And my really last question for you and for me, if I can answer, is how can folks stay in touch with you and support the work that you're going to do moving forward? Feel free to mention any projects that you're working on, and I'm happy to share any social media handles that you are active on. But I want to hand the floor over to you first in terms of how can folks stay in touch with you.
Yes. Well, I first will say that I still have Ready for Change, my pack. I will be traveling around. I'm looking to continue to support candidates and Democrats up and down the ballot. So I will be out there later this year in 25 and hopefully in 26 as well. But folks can reach me a number of ways across X, Instagram, and TikTok. My name is Troy Blackwell Jr., so TROY. BLACKWELLJR, literally just my full name. And you can also find me on LinkedIn at Troy Blackwell Jr. as well. So I look forward to connecting with folks there. And again, happy to answer any questions folks have and being a resource.
Absolutely. And folks, Troy is absolutely right. I looked up Troy on social media on my own device and didn't even take a millisecond to get in touch with Troy. So please follow, like, subscribe, Troy, and also please subscribe to this YouTube channel and this podcast as well. My name is Jason Park. This is Storytelling in Politics with Jason Park, and thank you so much for being here for our inaugural episode. Have a good rest of your night, folks. Thank you.